What can we expect this year? Growth in sub-Saharan Africa continues to be marked by considerable differences in countries' performance. Some 21 countries, mainly the more diversified economies, are expected to sustain growth at 5% or more. But in the other 24 more resource-dependent economies, including the largest, Nigeria and South Africa, growth looks set to remain subdued. This implies much lower improvements in standards of living for people in these countries and several others. Overall, based on current policies, the economic recovery in sub-Saharan Africa is set to strengthen. Growth is projected to pick up from 3% in 2018 to 3.5% this year and stabilize at around 4% over the medium term. Why is growth in sub-Saharan Africa weaker than the recent past? The region's three largest economies, Nigeria, South Africa, and Angola, which are resource-intensive countries and account for over 50% of regional output, have seen their growth performance deteriorate markedly over the past decade. This has pulled down the regional average and masks the continued rapid growth in many other countries in the region. For the fast-growing economies, the likes of Benin, Ethiopia, and Senegal, there is a need to hand over the reins of growth from the public to the private sector. Public investment has partly driven the growth that these countries are enjoying, but it has also led to a steady increase in public debt levels. For the more resource-intensive countries that are also growing less rapidly, the likes of Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa, policy reforms are needed to help diversify their economies, address policy uncertainties, and facilitate greater private sector investment. Starting with conflict, the incidence and intensity of conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa has declined markedly across the region since the early 2000s. Still, around 30% of countries in the region are being impacted by some form of conflict. The nature of conflict in the region has also changed, with fewer, less traditional civil wars and intra-state conflicts, and more non-state-based conflicts, including the targeting of civilians from terrorist attacks, particularly in the Sahel. These conflicts in the region are associated with a large and persistent decline in per capita GDP, and also affect nearby regions and countries. In this context, it is even more important to promote inclusive economic development, which brings in regions and reduces disparities in development outcomes. Turning to intra-regional trade. Once completed, the African Continental Free Trade Area agreement will establish a market of 1.2 billion people with a combined GDP of $2.5 trillion. It can significantly boost intra-African trade, particularly if reforms are also implemented to tackle country-specific non-tariff bottlenecks to trade. Importantly, we see that intra-regional exports in Africa are more diversified and have a higher technology content than Africa's exports to the rest of the world. For example, 40% of intra-regional trade is accounted for by manufactured goods, while 75% of total exports to the rest of the world are minerals, for example, crude oil. To ensure that the benefits of regional trade integration are shared by all, policymakers, of course, need to be mindful of the adjustment costs that trade liberalization can entail and address those.